Right then. Hello. Tonight we're wading into a topic so cheerful, so universally beloved, it makes a root canal look like a spa day Gaza. Specifically, why the idea that you can somehow bomb your way to a lasting peace there is, and I say this with all the British understatement I can muster, a steaming pile of, well, let's just say misguided optimism. Today we're diving into the harsh realities of the Gaza crisis. These truths are difficult to face, but understanding them is crucial for any hope of resolution. And believe me, difficult to face is putting it mildly. It's like looking directly at the sun, if the sun was made of intractable geopolitical misery and historical trauma. For decades, the narrative has often been simplified, reduced to sound bites that fit neatly on a news chyron, but do absolutely nothing to explain the crushing complexity of it all. The international community wrings its hands, various powers flex their muscles or more often their vetoes, and meanwhile, actual human beings are trapped in a cycle that seems designed by a particularly sadistic committee. We're going to peel back some of those layers, look at why the military-first approach is a bit like trying to put out a house fire with a flamethrower. Impressive display, sure, but fundamentally counterproductive, so buckle up. We're going to explore the grim merry-go-round of military campaigns, the tangled web of international inaction, the deep scars on everyone involved, the flickering, almost extinguished hope of a two-state solution, and what frankly terrifying endgames might be on the table. It's not going to be fun, but if we're ever going to talk about solutions, we first need to stare the problem in all its multifaceted ugliness right in the face. And yes, it's an ugly face. A face only a mother who is also a political scientist specializing in intractable conflicts could love. Alright, let's talk about the core premise that military might can somehow, eventually, solve Gaza. Israel has for years embarked on campaigns with the stated aim of destroying Hamas. Noble goal perhaps if you ignore everything else, but let's look at the scorecard. The 2023 to 2025 Gaza war, like its predecessors, has resulted in an absolutely staggering number of civilian casualties. We're talking about entire neighborhoods turned to rubble, a humanitarian disaster that makes a mockery of international law, and, crucially, a deepening of hatred that will fuel this fire for generations. It's like trying to kill a weed by only cutting the top off. You're not actually solving the problem, you're just ensuring it comes back, angrier, and with more lawyers. The fundamental misunderstanding here is that groups like Hamas, and indeed many similar movements throughout history, are not just armies. They are ideologically driven. You cannot bomb an idea out of existence. In fact, trying to do so often has the opposite effect. It creates martyrs, it galvanizes support, it validates the narrative of oppression, and it often leads to the movement resurfacing, perhaps under a new name, perhaps with even more extreme tactics. It's the political equivalent of a horror movie villain. You think they're dead, you turn your back, and surprise, they're back with a bigger knife and a sequel already greenlit. This isn't a video game where you clear a level and the bad guys are gone forever. So, let's imagine for a moment, a hypothetical future where Israel achieves a complete military defeat of Hamas. Every tunnel collapsed, every leader captured or killed, then what? Do we honestly believe that peace will magically blossom? Of course not, because unless the root causes, the crippling occupation, the suffocating blockade that turns Gaza into an open-air prison, the profound indignity of statelessness, the daily humiliations, are addressed, new groups will inevitably emerge. They will rise from the rubble, fueled by the same desperation and anger. It's a tragic, predictable cycle, like a terrible TV show that keeps getting renewed, despite universally awful reviews. Now, where is the international community in all this? Well, they're very good at issuing statements. Oh, the statements. So many statements. The UN, bless its well-intentioned heart, often condemns violence, passes resolutions, and expresses deep concern. Which is lovely, but deep concern doesn't rebuild a hospital or stop a bullet. The UN Security Council, the body supposedly responsible for maintaining international peace and security, is more often a stage for geopolitical posturing where veto powers ensure that any meaningful action is about as rare as a politician admitting they were wrong. It's like having a fire department that's fantastic at writing reports about the fire, but consistently forgets to bring water. Then there's the wider world, which is, shall we say, a tad divided. The United States, for instance, provides staunch, often unconditional support for Israel, including billions in military aid. This isn't a secret, it's a cornerstone of their foreign policy. On the other side, Arab and Muslim nations vocally support Palestinian rights, issue their own condemnations and occasionally offer financial aid. But when it comes to real, concerted intervention that could shift the dynamics, that's much harder to find. It's like a school playground fight where one kid's older brother is always there to back him up, while the other kid gets a lot of encouraging shouts from the sidelines but no actual help when he's getting his head flushed down the toilet. As a result, ceasefires, when they eventually happen, are usually temporary bandages on a gaping wound. They stop the immediate bloodshed, which is undeniably good, but they almost never address the core issues. They freeze the conflict in place until the next inevitable eruption. Global diplomacy, as currently practiced, might be able to pause the horror, but it seems fundamentally incapable of ending the crisis permanently. What's needed is a bold, paradigm-shifting change in international policy, a willingness to exert real pressure, and the kind of political willpower that frankly has been MIA for decades. Without that, we're just watching reruns of the same tragedy with slightly different casualty numbers. Let's step away from the grand chessboard of geopolitics for a moment and talk about the human cost, not just in lives lost, but in minds scarred. Both Israeli and Palestinian populations are deeply, profoundly traumatized. This isn't hyperbole, it's a catastrophic psychological reality. Israelis live with the generational trauma of the Holocaust, compounded by decades of regional conflict, suicide bombings, and the constant gnawing fear of rocket attacks from Gaza or elsewhere. Imagine the air raid sirens, the rush to bomb shelters, the anxiety that permeates daily life. That leaves an indelible mark, a constant sense of siege mentality that shapes perspectives and hardens hearts. And then there's Gaza. Gazans live under a brutal, suffocating siege, now compounded by waves of massive destruction from repeated wars. Imagine your home destroyed not once but potentially multiple times. Imagine rampant poverty, unemployment rates that are frankly astronomical, a healthcare system on the verge of collapse even before the latest bombardment, and the constant surveillance from drones. Imagine raising children in an environment where the horizon offers little more than more concrete rubble and the memory of lost loved ones. The trauma there is layered, intergenerational, and utterly devastating, creating a pervasive sense of hopelessness and rage that is frankly entirely understandable. This shared yet entirely separate experience of trauma is a massive, perhaps the most significant obstacle to peace. Hatred, fear, and profound mistrust run incredibly deep on both sides, poisoning any attempt at reconciliation. Political deals, even if they could be reached, are built on quicksand if the underlying psychological wounds aren't addressed. Long-term peace requires decades of dedicated work on healing, on truth-telling, on restorative justice, on simply seeing the humanity in the other. It requires far more than just redrawing lines on a map or signing a document. It requires a collective emotional exorcism, and right now, both sides are still possessed by their respective demons. The two-state solution. The diplomatic equivalent of a beloved elderly relative everyone keeps saying is doing okay while they're clearly hooked up to every machine in the hospital, and the doctors are exchanging grim glances. For decades, it's been the theoretical cornerstone of peace efforts, Israel and a viable, independent Palestinian state existing side by side in peace and security. A lovely idea, truly, like a unicorn that also does your taxes. But let's be brutally honest, it's currently on life support, and the plug is looking awfully tempting to some. One of the biggest nails in its coffin, the relentless expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These settlements, deemed illegal under international law, carve up the very land that would form a Palestinian state, making a contiguous, viable entity look less like a future country and more like a slice of Swiss cheese designed by a sadist. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of settlers, roads that Palestinians can't use, and a de facto annexation that happens inch by inch, day by day. It's like trying to bake a cake while someone keeps eating the flour, the eggs, and then, just for kicks, the damn bowl. How can you negotiate the division of land when one side is actively taking and building on it, as if the negotiation is already over and they've won? Then there's the leadership issue, or more accurately, the lack of effective leadership issue. On both sides, political leadership is fractured, often unpopular, and in many cases seems more interested in maintaining power than in making the painful compromises necessary for peace. The Palestinian leadership itself is disastrously divided, with Hamas controlling Gaza and the Palestinian Authority having limited and dwindling authority in the West Bank. It's hard to make a deal when you can't even agree on who's supposed to be at the negotiating table representing your side, unless there's a seismic political shift, a renewed serious peace process driven by international actors with actual leverage, some form of transformative outside intervention, or a powerful grassroots movement on both sides demanding change. The two-state dream may very well be pronounced dead on arrival, or more accurately, dead in the waiting room, because it never even got admitted. So, if military solutions are a mirage and the two-state solution is gasping for air, what are the possible endgame scenarios? Well, none of them look like a walk in the park, unless that park is Jurassic Park and the fences are down. One distinct possibility is a long-term Israeli occupation or the establishment of a significant buffer zone inside Gaza. Israel might reoccupy Gaza fully or maintain military control over large swaths of it, ostensibly for security. The result? The humanitarian crisis deepens. Any remaining Gazan infrastructure is geared towards security, not civilian life, and a simmering insurgency almost certainly continues. This is not a solution. It's a recipe for an endless cycle of violence and repression, the status quo with extra misery. Another scenario, often floated by those looking for a regional quick fix, involves some kind of grand bargain with Arab states. Think the US and various Arab nations pushing for normalization deals like a much-discussed Saudi-Israel agreement in exchange for some concessions to the Palestinians. This might involve promises of significant aid for rebuilding Gaza, perhaps some form of limited autonomy, but almost certainly not full statehood or the addressing of core grievances like the right of return. It's the diplomatic equivalent of putting a fancy new roof on a house whose foundations are crumbling. Looks good from afar, but fundamentally unsound. It prioritizes regional alliances over Palestinian self-determination, kicking the can further down a very bloody road. Then there are the more, shall we say, dramatic possibilities. An international trusteeship or UN administration for Gaza? Highly unlikely given the current geopolitical climate and the sheer complexity and resources required, but it could emerge if the humanitarian crisis becomes so globally intolerable that something radical has to be tried. Or perhaps a bottom-up revolution. Palestinians, utterly exhausted by war and the catastrophic failure of their own leadership, rise up against both Hamas and the occupation. Simultaneously, a critical mass of Israelis, tired of endless war and the moral and financial cost, demand a genuine end to the conflict, leading to a powerful grassroots peace movement. This is the hopeful, if incredibly challenging scenario. And then there's the darkest, timeline-full annexation by Israel. Or even more horrifyingly, the ethnic expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza or the West Bank. Some extreme factions openly advocate for this. It would be an unambiguous war crime, provoke global outrage, and destabilize the entire region for decades. But in the fog of war and desperation, even the unthinkable can, terrifyingly, become a remote possibility. So after all that, where does it leave us? Well, probably depressed. And if you're not, you may want to check your pulse. But the aim here isn't to induce despair. It's to foster a clear-eyed understanding of the monumental task at hand. The idea that this crisis, decades in the making, rooted in such profound historical injustices and contemporary suffering, can be solved with more advanced weaponry or higher walls is frankly an insult to everyone's intelligence, and more importantly, an insult to the victims on all sides. It's a fantasy, and a dangerous one at that. The cycle of violence, the political stagnation, the international apathy, these are all symptoms of a much deeper malaise. The harshest truth is this: the Gaza crisis will not end until the deeper political, social, and historical wounds are confronted, including ending the occupation, ensuring safety and security for both peoples, and granting Palestinians real, meaningful self-determination. Any end that ignores justice, that papers over the cracks of inequality and dispossession, will only be the start of the next, perhaps even more brutal, cycle. It's not just about stopping the shooting, it's about building something sustainable in its place. This requires courage, it requires empathy, and it requires a radical departure from the failed policies of the past. It means listening to voices that have been marginalized, challenging narratives that have been set in stone, and demanding accountability from leaders who have consistently chosen power over peace. It's an incredibly difficult path, fraught with obstacles and setbacks, but the alternative, as we've seen tonight, is simply more of the same, an endless repetition of tragedy. And surely, we can aspire to something better than that. Thank you. Good night.